Haley, a young woman, had just returned from her morning run and went straight to her sister Sienna's room to wake her up. Sienna seemed reluctant to get up, but Haley firmly reminded her that she had worked hard to feel better, so Sienna had to get up and couldn't delay any longer. After that, Haley, Josh, and Sienna started getting ready for their camping trip. They loaded their gear into the car and headed to a secluded spot deep in the woods. Upon arriving, Josh and Haley walked through the forest, enjoying the peace of the place. They talked about the calmness they felt amidst the serene nature. Suddenly, Josh casually mentioned that he was ready to give it a try. They eventually entered the tent and zipped it up tightly. Meanwhile, Sienna was searching for a phone signal, wandering further into the woods. In the middle of her search, Sienna was startled to see a massive spaceship flying above her. Without hesitation, she ran back to the tent and called out to Josh and Haley. The three of them were shocked and speechless, staring at the spaceship as it came closer. However, as the spaceship started to slow down and appeared calmer, Haley felt something was wrong. Suddenly, a scream from someone Sienna had tried to call on the phone echoed, followed by a high-pitched frequency that hurt their ears. Shortly after, they all lost consciousness. That night, Haley woke up to find herself lying on the ground, with Josh sprawled next to her. Haley tried to wake Josh up, and when he regained consciousness, they saw that Sienna was also waking up. Confused, they asked each other what had just happened, but no one knew. They decided to head to the car to look for a radio, hoping to get some information. On their way to the car, they began hearing a pounding sound that was getting closer, followed by an explosion in the distance. Sienna panicked and suggested they leave, but Haley insisted on staying. "There's no point in going back," she said, asking Sienna and Josh to check the radio while she stayed near the tent. Josh and Sienna eventually reached the car, but Josh quickly announced that the radio was broken. Reluctantly, Josh grabbed a flashlight from the trunk, and they began walking back to the tent. On their way, they suddenly heard footsteps behind them, startling them. They hurried back to the tent. When they got back to the tent, Haley had already lit a fire and was waiting for them. They all sat together around the campfire, and a thirsty Sienna asked for water and food. Josh handed her some water, and as Sienna drank, she heard a strange sound coming from the forest. Suddenly, she turned on her flashlight and aimed it toward the sound. Behind a tree, she saw someone standing still. The woman began crawling toward them, her body moving unnaturally. Black liquid dripped from her body, and she collapsed before she could get any closer. When Josh tried to check her pulse, the woman suddenly scratched him, knocking him over. Shortly after, strange animal-like sounds echoed, repeated by other voices coming from the surrounding forest. The three of them quickly packed up the tent and started walking again, staying alert after what had just happened. As they walked, they encountered a man who warned them about creatures that could transform into humans, like the group they had just met. They continued on at a brisk pace, but one of the creatures, a transformed human, sensed their presence and began chasing them. They ran as fast as they could, but Josh fell. As the creature approached, the man they had met earlier, Liam, jumped in and tackled the creature, saving Josh. The other creatures that were still following them noticed that one of their group was gone, so they stopped chasing. Liam, Josh, Haley, and Sienna kept moving deeper into the forest. However, Sienna started feeling paranoid and scared, and Haley patiently calmed her down so they could keep going. Eventually, they found a safe spot to camp. Liam told them that if they wanted to stay, they had to follow his rules. Liam then instructed them to step out of the tent, especially Sienna. That night, a helicopter flew overhead, and Josh quickly lit a flare to signal the helicopter that they were there. Hearing Josh's commotion, Liam followed and tried to stop him. Josh kept waving the flare, but suddenly Liam arrived and tackled Josh to the ground. They wrestled, and at one point Josh started choking Liam, but Haley rushed in and tried to push Josh away. Josh seemed unaware of what was happening. After Haley managed to push him off, Josh snapped back to his senses, but Liam was still furious, yelling at Josh for exposing their location to the attackers. Enraged, Liam stormed off into the night. Josh explained to Haley that he wasn't the one choking Liam, and the two realized that the wound on Josh's hand might have been affecting his behavior. Liam returned to the tent, where Sienna was waiting, and began packing his things to leave. Sienna pleaded with him to stay, and after some back and forth, Liam eventually decided to remain with the group. However, as they all gathered, Sienna noticed that Josh's wound was worsening. She became worried that Josh might turn into one of those creatures. Haley tried to calm her down and reassured her that they would handle it together, keeping it a secret so Liam wouldn't find out. The next morning, Josh sat intently working on fixing the radio Liam had given him. Haley watched him closely. It turned out to be a shortwave radio, and they realized that whoever had initially placed the radio in the tent must have had a wider reach. Meanwhile, Liam approached Sienna and offered her some medication. Sienna, who was recovering from an addiction, hesitated. She stared at the pill for a moment but eventually decided to take it. Josh felt trapped and increasingly frustrated with the situation. He wandered alone in the forest, his mind in turmoil. Meanwhile, Haley went to the river to fetch water, but suddenly heard strange noises coming from a nearby tunnel. Elsewhere, Josh found Sienna dancing by herself. He approached her and pulled her into an embrace, joining her in the dance. Not long after, Haley arrived and saw them together. The moment Haley looked at Sienna, she realized her sister was drunk. Angry, Haley confronted Liam, demanding to know what he had given Sienna. Liam, appearing calm, responded that it wasn't the right time for Sienna to go through withdrawal. They argued briefly, both realizing they couldn't rely on the incoming weather to help their situation. Haley grew more convinced they needed to leave soon. Eventually, Haley dragged Josh to the tunnel to show him where the strange noises were coming from, and they both became more certain that the outside world wasn't safe. Back at the tent, Liam returned in frustration, throwing his belongings around. Afterward, he stepped out and told Josh they needed to leave immediately to fetch water. Meanwhile, Haley searched for Sienna and found her in Liam's tent, drinking again. When Haley tried to take the bottle from her, Sienna shoved her and started hitting her. However, Haley managed to calm Sienna down and de-escalate the situation. In the forest, Josh felt exhausted and unwell, worried that they might be attacked by the transforming creatures. Despite his fears, they pressed on. Back at the tent, Haley and Sienna had a heated argument about Sienna's drug use. Furious, Haley stormed out in frustration. In the forest, Josh confronted Liam, accusing him of drugging Sienna. Liam fired back, accusing Josh of failing to protect the two women. Enraged, Liam shoved Josh to the ground, blaming him and Haley for abandoning Sienna. Josh, trying to calm Liam down, told him that if anything happened to him, Liam would be the only person they could rely on. Liam eventually helped Josh up, and they continued their journey to get water. After wandering around, they finally found a clean water source and began filling their bottles. However, as they were doing so, they spotted the corpse of a woman lying not far away. When they approached, Josh noticed that the woman had been shot in the head. He was stunned to realize there was no blood coming from her body. Liam, panicking, quickly pulled Josh away, urging them to leave the area immediately. After filling all their bottles, Josh felt an intense pain in his body and collapsed, screaming in agony. Liam insisted on checking the wound, but Josh refused. Meanwhile, after their argument, Haley walked away from the tent, searching for a radio signal to try and communicate with someone. That morning, Liam and Josh returned to their tent, but suddenly, a group of transformed humans ambushed them. Liam was overpowered immediately, but Josh managed to fend them off. Liam called out to Josh, but for some reason, Josh seemed to be controlled by something else. After a moment, Josh regained control and killed one of the creatures, but more of them began to close in. The two of them ran, only to be surrounded by even more of the creatures. Liam pulled out his gun, but Josh was once again affected by an unseen force and pushed Liam's hand down, stopping him from shooting. As one of the transformed creatures lunged at Liam, Josh quickly forced his own hand and stabbed the creature with a knife. They fled and hid under a tree, but there, Liam cautiously pointed his gun at Josh's head, wary of the changes happening to him. After returning to the camp, Josh told Haley that Liam now knew what was happening to him and that he could no longer control himself. The situation was getting worse. Meanwhile, Sienna went to Liam's tent to apologize and tried to get closer to him, but Liam offered her drugs again. Unable to resist, Sienna took them and gave one to Liam as well. Behind their tent, Haley noticed Josh trembling and lying in a restless sleep. Feeling anxious, Haley decided to leave and head toward the tunnel. There, she tucked her bag away and placed the water containers nearby. When she returned, Haley was shocked to find that Josh was no longer in the tent. Panicked, Haley rushed to Liam's tent and told him that something had happened to Josh and they needed to find him immediately. Josh, walking alone in the forest, became increasingly entangled in the chaos. Sienna found him and tried calling out to him, but Josh didn't respond. Liam arrived and said that Josh had gone too far, and it would be better if they just killed him. Sienna insisted on bringing him back. They returned to Liam's tent and tried to help Josh, but Liam pulled out his gun and warned Haley that Josh had turned and was now a threat. Sienna stepped in between them and managed to convince Liam to give them 1 hour. Liam reluctantly agreed and stormed out of the tent. When the hour passed, Liam returned and demanded that Haley let go of Josh. When Haley ignored him, Liam sat down and explained that he had seen his friends turn before, and the best thing they could do for Josh was to end his life. With a heavy heart, Liam tied up Josh and Haley, then injected Josh with something. Liam sat beside him, trying to reassure Haley that he would make sure Josh didn't feel any pain. Meanwhile, Sienna returned to the tent after seeing the bag in the tunnel. Furious, Sienna hit Haley, and Liam dragged her to another tent. There, Liam injected Sienna with drugs, assuring her that he wouldn't leave her. Josh eventually regained consciousness and began banging his head against the metal pole of the tent. Haley, who was tied up, could only beg him to stop, but Josh continued. At that moment, Josh cried out for help, but with her hands tied, Haley couldn't do much. Finally, Josh kept hitting his head until he died. However, after a while, Josh started moving again. Slowly he got up, and he had now become one of the transformed humans. Josh easily freed himself from his restraints and crawled toward Haley. He untied Haley's hands and simply stared at her, but did nothing else. When Haley left the tent, Liam pulled out his gun and forced Haley to go back inside. Josh growled, and Liam shouted, ordering Josh to leave. Sienna tried to convince Liam to lower his gun, but Liam began manipulating her, making her think he was going to leave them with Josh and take all their supplies. Feeling cornered, Sienna finally attacked Liam. Using the distraction, the two women ran away. Josh, now fully transformed, approached Liam and drilled a hole into his head with his finger, while the two women ran into the forest. Haley and Sienna walked together, eventually reconciling, but they suddenly heard a noise and saw transformed humans in the distance. They quickly turned around and started running, but the creatures managed to catch up and attack Haley. At that moment, strange symptoms began appearing in Haley. In a white vision enveloping her, Haley saw Josh and Sienna, and when she returned to reality, Haley found Sienna lying on the ground with a hole in her forehead. Overcome with despair, Haley walked closer and began crying over the loss of her sister. Covered in blood, she walked toward the forest, where her attacker had stabbed her. Haley then went to the place where she first saw the alien ship, deciding to walk toward it, aimless and without clear purpose.